From music, stand-up comedy, psychology, cancer research, bodybuilding, MMA, so much more, the OnlyKings podcast is really ingrained right here in the community. We are joined by OnlyKings podcast host Noah Vargas, talking about the podcast and what makes it a must-listen. Noah, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
OnlyKings podcast. Talk to me about how this all got started.
Yeah, so about 4 years ago, I just gotten back from a deployment, and I was working at my job, and I was listening to a podcast with Post Malone as the guest, and I thought, I mean, the first hour, this is really informational about what he's doing, how he came up, and that kind of stuff. But the back 3 hours of it was just him and the host just talking and having a good time. I thought, me and my friends, what do we do on a Friday night, right? We just hang out. We barely get through any video games because we're just like talking nonsense to each other. So I thought, okay, so if you just put a mic in the middle of it. And that's really all a podcast is. It's a good hang. And 4 years later, I'm on the news.
That's incredible, right, man? And it's totally stuck. 4 years, that's a long time to get the podcast up and going. Let's talk a little bit about the content listeners are in store for when they listen to the podcast. Talk to me about some of the guests and what the content they're in store for.
Sure. So I'm born and raised right here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we have a ton of local talent, as you guys know right here. Right. I've had a lot of my friends on the show. You guys have had the Sons of Harvard and the Mayo Cakes and all those guys. So I've had all them. There's Amanda right there from the Red Light Cameras.
Yep.
Josh, an amazing comedian. I've had a wide range of guests from right here in the state of New Mexico. It's been awesome. I named a couple of music guys, comedians, Josh Fournier, Zach Abeda, Buck D, Robert Gibson, a lot of guys that I've not only become friends with, but they've been mentors to me in both the comedy and the podcast space. So it's highlighting a lot of what makes New Mexico amazing.
Really the latest and the latest and greatest of what we got going on right here in our state. You touched on it earlier, the process of kind of getting the podcast started. Talk to me about how you have been able to sustain this podcast for 4 years, because a lot of people, we want to start a podcast, that, like we said, they do a couple episodes, then it just fizzles out. How have you been able to sustain this thing for 4 years, man?
That's a great question. This podcast would not be happening if it weren't for the amazing guests that have agreed to come on for the first time and have agreed to come back, and then the amazing people that I've got around me. 4 years ago, I had the idea, and I mentioned it to all my friends and my girl, and they're like, yeah, do it. See what happens. And now 4 years later, it's all a new challenge, right? I treat it like a video game. It's like, okay, how can I make my set? We were talking about sets earlier. How can I make my set better? How can I network and reach out to new people? How do I go out and meet new people? That type of thing, and build those type of relationships that, and then myself creating a space where people feel comfortable being heard. I mean, after about 2 hours, people really start getting into their, the real, important parts of their lives. Being able to hear that and document that, and then being able to broadcast that out for other people to see, I think it's that model that makes it sustainable.
Absolutely. Something new every day, too. And, of course, when you're listening to a podcast, the content has to be interesting, right? Talk to me about what makes a great podcast, something that keeps people listening.
Sure. So there's a million ways to do a podcast, and there's a million different styles. But for me personally, I'd say the top three things is, first one, the freedom of speech, right? You're allowing your guests to say what they like, how they really feel, what their ideas are, what their beliefs are, whether it's about music, whether it's about cancer research, bodybuilding, whatever they love doing, how they truly feel about that. The second one is exposure, right? You're exposing yourself and then by proxy your audience to new ideas, new people that maybe had never heard of before, never seen before, and now because of their exposure to these new people, they can maybe have their brain work a different way or a better way. And then the third one is, it's just a fun time, right? The best podcast makes you feel like you're in the room with the people that are doing it. Whether it's 2 people or 5 people that are on the episode, as long as you as a listener feel you're right there with them, that's a pretty successful episode.
Man, that's great stuff. I want to dial into the OnlyKings podcast now just after listening to that. It's local, it's fun, it's educational, it's New Mexico, folks. The big question here now is, where can we listen to the OnlyKings podcast?
Anywhere you can find your podcast. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google. The video version of it's on YouTube. We are on Instagram, just OnlyKings podcast. You look it up, you'll find it there, and just all social media platforms. Yeah.
There we go. It's a new year, and they're not slowing down at all. OnlyKings podcast, Noah Vargas. Great stuff. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
I'm proud to announce that the podcast is now officially sponsored by the fine people over at Chop Chili Company. Guys, this is some of the best chili you can get here in the state of New Mexico, and they are online as well as in stores. They can be found at Smith's, Albertsons, Sprouts, John Brooks, and Lowe's Corner Market. They have 3 amazing flavors that you see here, and they also have frozen green chili that you can get online. Go on over to the website, chopchilico.com, and get yourself some amazing chili today. podcast is now officially sponsored by the amazing people over at High Desert Relief, a premier herbal destination right here in the state of New Mexico. They have extremely well-trained and knowledgeable staff that are more than happy to help you find what you're looking for or try something that you maybe have never thought of. They have 2 locations here in Albuquerque, 1 in Santa Fe. All 3 will be listed right here and in the description of this episode. All 3 offering legendary products at absolutely legendary prices, including this awesome merch that they were so kind enough to gift me here. All of this can be found at all 3 of their locations. Again, big thank you to the guys over at HDR for supporting. Now back to the episode.